Invited as a nobody, revealed as a Navy_Admiral at the dinner table.
I never told my fiancé I was a Navy Admiral. He thought I was just a normal officer. He invited me to dinner with his parents to see how they'd treat someone ordinary. But as soon as I walked through that door, everything changed forever. The white dress uniform felt like armor. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, adjusting the gold buttons on my collar, running my fingers over the rows of ribbons that decorated my chest. Each one a story, a sacrifice, a silent war nobody ever knew I fought. Rear Admiral Victoria Daniel. 2 stars. 15 years of bleeding in the dark so others could sleep in the light. And tonight, I was going to pretend to be nobody. Not because I was ashamed, never that. But because the man I loved, the man who had somehow cracked open the iron chest I kept around my heart, deserved to know what kind of family he came from before I gave him everything I had left to give. Marcus Webb had no idea who he was really engaged to. We'd met 8 months ago at a charity gala for veterans' families. He was there representing his father's real estate development firm, Webb and Associates, one of those polished, well-connected companies that built luxury condominiums on land that used to house working families. Marcus himself was different, or so I thought. Warm, funny, the kind of man who listened when you spoke and remembered the details 3 weeks later. He knew I was in the Navy. I told him that much. I wore my uniform on our 3rd date because I came straight from a Pentagon briefing and didn't have time to change. He called me beautiful. He said he admired service members. He held my hand across the restaurant table and told me his grandfather had served in Korea. What he didn't know was my rank, my clearance level, the weight of the decisions I'd made in rooms that don't exist on any official floor plan. I kept it quiet the way I kept most things quiet, strategically. Because I'd learned, through years of navigating a world that was never built for women like me, that people reveal their true character when they believe no one important is watching. And I needed to see the Webbs before I became one. "You look nervous," said Commander Diane Osei, my oldest friend and the only person on Earth who could read me like a classified document. She was sitting on my couch, watching me fuss with my civilian blazer, because tonight I was going without the uniform. Tonight I was Victoria Daniel, Navy officer, nothing more. No stars, no title, no weight in the room when I entered. "I'm never nervous," I said. "Victoria," she gave me the look. "The one that said, I've seen you brief the Secretary of Defense, and I've also seen you cry over a rescue mission that didn't go right, so don't play games with me." I exhaled. His mother called me the military girl on the phone, not my name, not even Marcus's fiancé, just the military girl. Diane was quiet for a moment, and his father. "Marcus says he's old school, big on status, likes to know where people rank in the world before he decides how to treat them." She picked up her wine glass slowly. "So you're going in undercover?" "I'm going in honestly. I just won't be volunteering information they haven't earned the right to know yet." She raised her glass. "Admiral Daniel, you terrify me sometimes." "Good," I said and picked up my keys. "That's the point." The Webb estate was 40 minutes outside the city, tucked behind iron gates, and a long gravel driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. It was the kind of house that announced itself before you even rang the bell. We have money, we have history, and we decide who belongs here. Marcus met me at the door. His face lit up the moment he saw me, and for just a moment, the mission dissolved. He was wearing a navy blue sweater, ironic, and his eyes were the same warm amber that had made me lower my guard in the first place. "You look incredible," he murmured, kissing my cheek. "You're biased," I said softly. "Absolutely," he took my hand. "They're going to love you." I said nothing. I just followed him inside. The foyer smelled like expensive candles and old money. I clocked the exits immediately, a habit I'd never unlearned. Then I cataloged the room: antique furniture, framed portraits, a sweeping staircase that curved like a statement. Eleanor Webb appeared first, Marcus's mother. She was elegant in the architectural sense, structured, deliberate, cold at the load-bearing points. She shook my hand with the fingertips. "Victoria," she said, in the tone of someone testing a word they didn't expect to need again. "Marcus tells us you're in the Navy." "I am," I said pleasantly. "How dedicated." A pause, razor-thin and entirely intentional. "What do you do exactly?" "Officer work," I said. "Coordination, logistics, command structure." She nodded as though I'd said something mildly disappointing. Like I'd told her, I managed a mid-tier accounting firm. "Well," she said, "the important thing is that you love our son." The important thing, I noted, asterisk, was that I not be too important myself. Gerald Webb was louder, broader. The kind of man who filled rooms not with presence but with volume. He pumped my hand like a campaign handshake and immediately turned the conversation to himself, his developments, his connections, the senator he'd had lunch with last Thursday. "Military, huh?" he said, not quite looking at me. "Good pension, I hear. Smart play for someone without a lot of other options." Marcus stiffened beside me. I smiled. It has its advantages. "My brother-in-law did 2 years enlisted back in the 70s, Gerald continued, pouring himself a scotch and not offering me one. "Good kid. Never really amounted to much after that. Hard to translate those skills to the real world, you know." "I've managed," I said. He finally looked at me then, really looked, and I watched the familiar calculation happen behind his eyes. The unconscious ranking. Who is she? Where does she sit in the hierarchy I understand? And finding no recognizable markers of wealth or social altitude, he made his decision. Not important, tolerable, temporary probably. "Marcus is destined for great things," Gerald announced, moving on. "Webb and Associates is expanding into federal contracts. Defense sector, actually. Big opportunity if you know the right people." He laughed, the laugh of a man who assumed he always would. "Too bad we don't know anyone in that world." The silence that followed was brief. I filled it with a sip of water. "What a coincidence," I said mildly. Dinner was a performance in 3 acts. Alina asked, twice, whether I planned to continue working after marriage, phrasing it both times as though employment were something I'd be generously permitted to keep, like a childhood hobby. Gerald asked Marcus, directly in front of me, whether he'd considered the long-term implications of marrying someone whose career would involve frequent relocation and deployment. Not my asterisk career, someone's. And Marcus, my Marcus, handled it beautifully. He was patient and firm, deflecting with humor, redirecting with grace. I watched him navigate his parents like a man who had been doing it his whole life, which I realized he had. I stayed quiet. I watched, I cataloged. Because this was the test, and it wasn't about me. It was about who they were when they believed the woman across the table had nothing to offer them but love for their son. And they failed, not spectacularly, not with cruelty, but in the quiet, comfortable way that people fail when they've never had to examine themselves, with condescension dressed as concern, with dismissal wearing the costume of polite conversation. I'd seen it before. In boardrooms, in briefing rooms, in the faces of men who shook my hand and spoke over me until the moment they learned my rank and then couldn't apologize fast enough. It was Gerald who broke the evening open. We were having dessert when his phone rang. He excused himself loudly and took it in the hallway, voice carrying with the ease of a man who'd never learned that walls were thin. "Yes, I'm still working the Pentagon angle. No traction yet. These things take time. I need someone with actual access to the procurement division, not just some. Yes, Admiral level if possible. That's the tier that matters." He came back to the table, straightening his cuffs, looking satisfied. "Business," he said to no one in particular. I set down my dessert fork carefully. "Admiral level access," I said. "That's quite specific." Gerald blinked. "You know something about procurement." "A little," I said. And then, because the moment had arrived, not in anger, not in triumph, but with the quiet precision I'd spent 15 years developing, I reached into my blazer pocket and placed my military ID on the white tablecloth. The table went still. Gerald picked it up. I watched his face as he read it. The shift was seismic. I'd seen buildings collapse with less drama. Rear Admiral Victoria Daniel, United States Navy. 2 stars, Marcus said softly beside me. He'd known for 3 months. He'd waited for me to be ready. Eleanor set down her wine glass. Gerald looked up from the ID with the expression of a man who has just realized the nobody he'd been tolerating at his dinner table has security clearance above anything he'll ever touch in his lifetime. He started. You were saying, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, that you needed Admiral-level access. I want you to know that I heard everything you said in the hallway. And I want you to understand, Mr. Webb, that access is earned. It is not purchased. It is not inherited. And it is absolutely not granted to people who spend dinner explaining to a 2-star admiral that people in the military rarely amount to much. The silence was cathedral deep. I didn't know, Gerald began. I know you didn't, I said. That was the point. I didn't say it to humiliate him. I want to be clear about that. I said it because Gerald Webb needed to understand, and Eleanor too, that the woman their son had chosen to spend his life with was not a variable to be assessed and ranked and quietly tolerated. I said it because every woman who has ever been talked over at a table like that one deserved to have someone say it plainly. And I said it because Marcus deserved to know, before we built a life together, that his family could face the truth without the whole structure collapsing. Gerald apologized. It was uncomfortable and imperfect and real, which made it the most honest thing he'd said all evening. Eleanor apologized too. Hers was quieter and in some ways harder one. Marcus drove me home. We sat in the car outside my building for a long time without speaking. You planned all of that, he finally said. Not an accusation, just wonder. I needed to see them, I said. The real them. And I was quiet for a moment, looking at the city lights reflected in the windshield. Thinking about the years I'd spent making decisions in high-stakes rooms. Thinking about the weight of knowing that the most important judgment calls were never made in crises. They were made in the quiet moments when no one thought anyone important was watching. They're fixable, I said finally. People who can be embarrassed into reflection are still capable of change. It's the ones who double down that you have to worry about. He reached over and took my hand. Admiral Victoria Daniel, he said quietly, will you still marry me? I looked at him. This warm, patient, good man who had never once made me feel like I needed to be less than exactly what I was. That, I said, was never in question. 2 stars don't make you untouchable. They make you responsible. Responsible for the people under your command. Responsible for the truth, even when it's inconvenient. And responsible, above all, for choosing people in your life who deserve to know all of you, not just the version that fits comfortably at their dinner table. I am Rear Admiral Victoria Daniel. I have navigated enemy waters and Pentagon politics and rooms full of men who did not believe I belonged there. The hardest thing I have ever done was let someone love me without armor. But the most important test I ever ran wasn't on a naval vessel. It was at a dinner table, with a white tablecloth and a silent ID card in my pocket, waiting to see what kind of people would show up when they thought nobody important was watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded. How people treat nobody is who they actually are. Drop a comment below. What would you have done at that dinner table?